If a biologist just make it like it was, you know, because the biologist asked him, what would you like? And that tribal leader at that time, he said, make it like it was. I want to be able to see our salmon as it used to be. I want to be able to see our assume as they used to be. Because this was a place that, you know, along the river you could gather this food we're talking about. They used to, as my father said, there used to be blankets across the cliff sides of certain areas where you would collect them. You could just walk up with a gunny sack and fill your gunny sack up with them. And now today, that's not true. We don't see that anymore. And with all the hard work that, you know, our biologists, and, you know, it's a collaborative effort as we come together here. You know, you on your side and us on our side, and we're making sure that we rebuild this resource so that our future generations that are not here yet can enjoy that. Today, you know, we start the teaching, telling our children this is what we used to do. Now you can't even get a child to do that.
We'll open the table up to a discussion about where we go from here. Like everybody, every agency, to have an opportunity to give their perspective about this so that we understand the work we have going forward and to help.
You know, many years ago we sat in this room talking about this and how we were going to go and go about this and how it was going to be. And at that time, Roy Samsel mediated that meeting. You know, in that time, you know, we gave him a little history on how our people used to be. You know, tribal peoples traveled near and far to get their foods, and for each food was its own season, be it berries or fish, lamprey, deer, elk. And this was kind of a supermarket to our people as we travel through this country. And today, our younger people can't seem to visualize the lives that we lived long ago as young people, growing up 6, 7 years old, doing things that, you know, you can't even get a 15-year-old or 16-year-old to do today.
For about 6 months, although I am a native from Oregon. I was born and raised in the Grand Ronde community, Confederate Tribes of Grand Ronde, about an hour and a half southwest of here. My father was of California descent, and I had my first job actually working out in Grand Ronde as a youth crew member, digging trail in the woods that we have of our still somewhat small reservation in Timberlands. That was my first introduction to a lot of fish and wildlife back in the day. That's almost 30 years ago now. And I've come full circle to return back to the Northwest and be now in this position of influence at Bonneville to be able to make sure that we do right by the fish and wildlife. So I'm pretty excited when I saw that this was an opportunity for Bonneville to come and reaffirm its commitment to the Lamprey partnership. And we're happy to do that again here today. That being said, you know, Bonneville, typically folks look at Bonneville and they think about money, the checkbook that we bring to them. But there's a lot more than that we bring as well. We have a lot of staff that are dedicated to this mission of restoring fish and wildlife and lamprey in particular. And we have a lot of just passion about that mission. And I think Roy articulated that pretty well in his speech at our 75-year anniversary. We really, truly do believe in partnership and collaboration in achieving and implementing this, as Roy said, probably the largest fish and wildlife program in the world. You know, we believe that we here in the Northwest, as partners, can make better decisions than anyone in D.C. or anyone else needs to do. If we can't resolve it here locally amongst ourselves, then we need to really take a hard look in the mirror. So I hope that in that spirit, we'll continue to work hard together, be frank and straight with one another. I beg for forgiveness if I am too straight in the future with you all. And speaking truth, but I expect to
Thank you, Brian, and we do recognize the commitment and investment that Bonneville has made, nearly $2 million annually in a lot of the restoration work that's being done both on the main stem but also in the various tributaries of the Columbia. So it's a significant contribution and investment that Bonneville has made, and that partnership going forward, knowing what those accords and if the accords continue, how lamprey restoration will be part of that. That'll be a key question, and we know that you've already stepped up and made those investments already to help restore lamprey. Other folks, please, around the table, talk about the resources, the staff, the policy perspectives that you have, the reaffirmation to this agreement. Let's open up for discussion, please.
Good morning. My name is Roy Elliker from the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, and I hope folks around the table and outside the table certainly recognize that from the services perspective, we are all in to conserve and recover lamprey. There's no agency more committed, I think, than the Fish and Wildlife Service to this effort. And Don, I was going to elaborate on that and my remarks here in the agenda a little later, so I'll keep this short and let others talk. But I think you've heard from my friend Brian Mercier and others around the table that from the federal government's perspective, we always appreciate being reminded. I'm a good friend, Bruce Chin, on our tribal trust responsibilities, but I can assure you, sir, that not a day goes by in my office where we don't talk about that responsibility, and we don't look at that very seriously about how we work together closely with all the tribal interests. But in particular, today, we're going to talk about lamprey, and I'm very pleased to be here to do that. And with that done, I'll save my remarks a little bit here for later on the agenda, but thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Roy. I see my friend Steve Williams, ODFW, they've got a lot of resources. They're doing a lot of good work.
Used to be Steve Williams, ODFW, now it's Steve Williams, Pacific Station Marine Fisheries. Thank you, Don, I appreciate it. Yes. I'm here representing our Executive Director, Randy Fisher, who many of you know. He could not be with us here today, but I'm pleased to be here to also say that certainly from the Commission standpoint, we're here to reaffirm our commitment. I have had the pleasure of having over 40-year career in fisheries management here in the state of Oregon, and I've worked with a number of you around this table in a number of different venues. In terms of lamprey, going clear back to my time when I was working in the Hood River and 15-mile to the chutes, up into the Umatilla, Grand Ronde, particularly John Day, some interesting times with lamprey there. And then my career following into some work we did on the Willamette, working with a number of you around this table, trying to make that situation there in Willamette Falls work as well. My observation is that I think we've made more progress in recent years than any time I can imagine in lamprey conservation. We have a long ways to go, but I think we've made some tremendous strides. We now have some funding. Don, you did a nice job of outlining some of the funding. We need more. We have an agreement through the Fish Habitat NIFA agreement. We have plans in place that help us direct where we're going. All of those things keep the momentum moving. And as I say, we've got a long ways to go, but we've got to keep that momentum going. It's pretty easy, as some of you have seen, to have the emphasis on lamprey and the interest in lamprey can fall off the table pretty quickly. And it's important to look around this room how many people are here that have interest. That's something we want to certainly build on and continue. Our role as a commission is more on the administrative side of things, helping make sure that we get the funding in the right places and at the right time. That's what we're here for. We're glad to serve in that role and are pleased to be able to do that. And as I said, certainly want to reaffirm our commitment to the agreement that we have. So I look forward to the next few days, frankly, talking about lamprey, and thank you to all the partners and everyone here has put a lot of work into this program, and hope we can continue that into the future.
Thank you, Steve.
Around for the later discussion, which will have additional comments. But, you know, I think back to when we started the Accords, Fish Accords back in discussion really in 2006, 2007, culminating in a signing in 2008. You know, there was tremendous interest and push to better understand Lamprey Passage. That has been our focus over this last 9 or 10 years, even though we had started earlier, but we knew so little about, at the dams, what lamprey needed. And I would say that we learned a lot. We really moved many of our good engineers who had worked on salmon passage for years into the lamprey arena. And I would say that we've made some very significant strides through that process, recognizing we're not done yet. But we do recognize that there's been vast improvement, not only in just the counting of the lamprey, but also in the passage. With that, I can say that the Corps is committed to reaffirming on the Lamprey Conservation Initiative, and certainly we're committed to our fish accord with the tribe. So, and with that, I'll reserve discussion for
Steve Williams Jr., but I do follow in his footsteps, and I'm proud to do that. From the state's perspective, we are happy to be here. I especially appreciate being reminded by our tribal friends of what a great important species like lamprey, sturgeon, salmon mean to all of us in this region, and they are our history and our legacy going forward. So we certainly reaffirm our commitment to this, and it's clear when you look at state law and the policies of the state, there is no room for letting any species wink out on our watch. So we approach that with the same reverence you do. I'd like to leave the Columbia for a minute, just not that it isn't important and a big driver, but from our perspective, we have put a lot of effort into understanding what is going on with lamprey in our coastal systems, and have now a long time series of data that tells us a lot about how they're doing, and certainly doing better than the Columbia. Same thing in the Willamette here. Dr. Ben Clemens, who works for us almost solely on lamprey, has spent most of his career working in the Willamette, and as one of the real lamprey strongholds in the region, is really critical to understand the challenges lamprey face in that basin and how to keep them on track as well. I think the challenge for all of us is how do we be strategic with the limited resources we have. Lots of drivers in the region demanding time, effort, and money, and so we have to be focused on where to best put those efforts. And to that end, we've had been focused on a state conservation plan, which really looks at things like the population structure, what are the things that currently limit the productivity of lamprey, and then how do you focus the resources we have available on that. And as a state, I think we feel blessed having things like the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, which is a dedicated source of lottery funds to focus on really protecting and restoring watersheds. And in that process, we have to be really smart about making sure those dollars go to restoring aquatic ecosystems, not just simply restoring sticks and stones, which has been our history. So we really reaffirm that commitment, and Jason Robinson sits on that board as a tribal member, and we continue to remind folks through those processes of how to allocate those monies. It's also been exciting to see the lamprey ramps go into places like Winchester Dam on the Umpqua, on the Sandy, and places like that. Our engineers have had a big role in putting those together, and what an amazing thing to see lamprey get over some of these smaller systems with some real innovation that hasn't, ultimately not real difficult Thanks for your time, and looking forward to the continued discussion.
First off, I just want to thank everyone for coming here today. Your commitment to the time and effort of the Lamprey. It's taken a lot of time and effort to get to this point. People have been working, tribes and others have been working on this even before my time. So I'm very honored to be a part of what we're doing here, of being, helping the Lamprey, which is very important, not only to the tribes, but to the environment. And that's one thing that I think should connect us all, should give us all that the same effort that this species is a part of this world and should always be a part of this world. And just because it's important to us in a different way doesn't mean that it's not important to other people in other ways. So I'm very happy to be here and to listen to all the good words and to see the enthusiasm and effort of the people that sit around this table. One thing I want to echo is what's been said already, and what we already know is one of the main problems, which is passage down the river and back up. It's important we get these fish to the habitats that they need to get to, which are in the upper tributary, which is prime habitat. All these areas that they need to get to is waiting for them, and we just need to find that way and put that time and effort to getting those fish downriver and back up. That's one of the problems that we all agree on. Some of the other things I wanted to just say real quick is, we think the lamprey and the Snake River, they're in terrible shape. And, if ever a species deserves to be put on the endangered species list, it is the lamprey. And, that is very important to us. That is very important to all of us that happens. Or at least we put the effort, our best effort to make that happen. But, the Nez Perce and all the other tribes commends all the work that's being done. But the reason why we're sitting here today is that, we need to even have that greater push, that greater effort, because we know it's needed. And that's why we sit here today, because we know that we have to do that, have that extra effort, have that extra push, collaboratively, to move forward with the progress of bringing a species back that has been here for millions of years. And it took us less than 100 years to almost wipe them out. And I'm a part of that. We're all a part of that. So we all got to be a part of bringing it back. Another thing that we're concerned about is BPA and Congress's reluctance to appropriate suitable funds, because we may be in the same situation, in the future. So, those funds, we need to find a way to, which is what we're doing here, to find a way to get those funds that we need. With us, we're also concerned the administration will not treat the responsibilities with respect to species seriously. I think we all know that the administration is not going to is up to us to make that effort. And, just like we're doing right now, we need to commit ourselves to that. And I think that's what we're doing. Thank you.
But having worked in the tribe's natural resource department and cultural resource department, as well as the executive office, I really, I think a lot of good words have been said this morning, a whole lot of good words, and I really appreciate that. I appreciate all the people that are in this room. I see a lot of familiar faces, and I want to especially echo some of the words that have been said, especially the gentleman that quoted an earlier gentleman that said, let's not study the ills to death. And I definitely, on behalf of the tribe, I think that's something that the tribe agrees with. Not to say that knowledge isn't important. There's a building base of knowledge, right? And there needs to be more. And a lot of the knowledge about Scottsville is a direct result of the efforts of people in this room. And not that that's not appreciated, because it is very much appreciated. And I just want to emphasize, number one, moving that needle from more of the direction of studying it to death to more towards the direction of applying that knowledge and seeking those results. Like the earlier folks have said this morning, we know that upstream and downstream passage are problems. We know that. So, and we're learning more about that all the time on different kinds of projects. So, different kinds of facilities and dams, high-head dams, even the flood control dams. So that's the first message I wanted to say, and then the second is just appreciating all of the partners that have come together. Each and every one that's at this table today, Grand Ron sees as a partner and part of the solution. As was said, we're all part of the problem. Let's all be part of the solution. Thank you.
I want to reaffirm our continued support of the Lamprey agreement and the partnership approach to implementing that agreement. We anticipate funding at similar levels to what we've had in the past, subject to a minor problem of appropriations. Hopefully we'll survive this week and get a budget that will allow us to continue to work together in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, the U.S. Forces. Please go ahead.
Yes, Lance at Idaho Fish and Game. I'd like to echo many of the sentiments that have already come around the table with respect to the passage issues for lamprey. In Idaho, we sit in a fairly unique position in the Snake Basin, over 400 river miles from the ocean, and historically, lamprey went all the way to the headwaters of the Salmon River. In fact, one of the very first scientific surveys done in Idaho in the 1890s documented lamprey upstream of Alturas Lake, which is over 900 miles from the Pacific Ocean. We have a tremendous amount of habitat in Idaho protected in wilderness areas, the Middle Fork of the Salmon, parts of the South Fork, the Selway, and we continue to document wild natural recruitment of lamprey in these habitats, but they cannot continue forever. We really appreciate the efforts of our partners, the Nez Perce Tribe, and their translocation effort. There are clearly basins in the Snake that would not have lamprey any longer without those efforts, and we fully support that. We'll continue to document, monitor our wilderness populations, but from Idaho's perspective, lamprey are largely subject to passage issues, and we appreciate the cooperators around this table continuing to put money and time and effort into addressing those.
Thank you.
Hey, good morning, John X. Lang, U.S. Forest Service. has participated in lamprey conservation teams and technical working groups for the past several years. Our forest biologists have participated in the creation of the regional implementation plans, providing advice on habitat conditions, current lamprey distributions, and identifying restorative actions both on and off national forests for the lamprey conservation. We're currently working to identify funding for initiatives our agency can contribute to this conservation initiative, but in the meantime, we'll continue to use our existing funds to match partners' contributions to restoration on national forest system lands. I'm here to say that our agency will continue its commitment to the Pacific Lamprey Conservation Initiative Agreement by being an active participant in future proceedings, lending a supportive role to our partners, and continue to focus restoration by forest to maintain and improve lamprey habitat. We will continue to look for new funding possibilities and work to build new partnerships to further that conservation.
Ron Warren, I want to indicate that the Department of Fish and Wildlife will continue to participate and actively support the Pacific Lamprey Conservation Agreement. I don't have my checkbook with me, or Jim's checkbook. Our funding at this point is a little bit tenuous, but the department continues to support the recovery of the Pacific Lamprey, particularly in the Upper Columbia Basin. Pat Carai and myself continue to be engaged in the process. Our emphasis is, and we've heard it earlier, is on passage survival, particularly juvenile passage survival. That's where we're focused our efforts. Just last month, our Yakima screenshot project leader, Danny Dieterson, was able to apply for and receive some grant funding from the McNary Fisheries Compensation Committee to investigate lamprey screen, fish screen approach velocity angles in conjunction with the USGS Columbia Research Lab at Cook, Washington. And earlier our screenshot had actually constructed the lamprey tank that they use at the Cook Lab and work on investigating improved protection at water diversions, particularly gravity diversions. So hopefully we'll be able to develop screening criteria that work, do a better job of protecting juvenile lamprey and macrophthalmia. Because frankly, the screens that we built in the past were for salmonids, not for lamprey. The other thing that we've worked on is recovery of juvenile lamprey at irrigation shutdown. Pat and others have particularly worked with the Chelan PUD, the other PD, Mid-Columbia PUD, Grant and Douglas, and in several of these irrigation diversions that shut down, they've been able to salvage and recover thousands of juvenile lamprey that would have otherwise died. And working with Ralph Lankman in the Yakima Basin, the Bureau of Reclamation, the Yakima Basin, same sort of emphasis on saving or salvaging juvenile lamprey that would be rearing in the upper ends of irrigation canals. So, I'm going to leave it at that. We don't have as big a presence as our federal partners and the tribes, but we are committed to this and working in our own little focus area to try to improve survival of lamprey. So I want to thank everybody for having us here today.
Thank you. So I'm going to take a pause here. I want to talk about
Mayor Don, and thank you for the chance to spend a few minutes on the agenda here to talk a little bit about this long-term structure and where we're headed. But again, just to remind folks, so my name is Roy Elliker from from the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, and I'm here today speaking for Robin Thorson, the Regional Director, who unfortunately got called in to Washington, D.C. this week, and so I'm doing the best I can to replace her. I know she's a great speaker. So the other thing, Mr. Chair, is I wanted to spend just a couple of minutes and talk about my friend Roy Samsel. Because Roy not only was a great tribal leader, but he was a great conservation leader. And I just want to assure my tribal friends that the respect for Roy Samsel in our side, in the non-tribal side, is very, very high. It was very, very high. And so he is a great loss today. It makes me very sad that he is not here today for this meeting. And we always used to laugh because Roy's name was Roy, and my name was Roy. And when we sat together and people came up and talked to Roy, and it's not that common thing, so we're never sure, and there were sometimes both of us would sit there and be in a conversation, and each of us would wonder and ask each other later, so is that person really wanting to talk to you or talk to me? But we both would talk to them. But I guess the other thing I wanted to mention about Roy before I pass on to this is that what was great about Roy was he always had time for any issue or problem and to help you solve it. And it didn't matter if it was a small issue you think almost trivial, that you were with Roy and say, oh, Roy, by the way, I need to meet the ACMAs, and so how should I plan this, how should I do that? Or a very big issue, like how do we plan the Lamprey Summit? And no matter what, Roy would always call me back and always have some good ideas and advice. And, you know, that's just irreplaceable, a person like Roy. So I just wanted to give that a little tribute, my own personal tribute. I knew Roy many years and in many capacities in my career and in his. And he's a great loss today for me and for many other folks I know in the room. So where have we been so far on this lamprey issue? It just striking me. I'm sitting next to my close friends here, Bruce McIntosh and Steve Williams, and we all at one time worked for the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and we all remembered within our careers, it was probably 2000 or 2001, up until that point at Willamette Falls, one of the great lamprey collection points for the region. That it was first come, first served, everybody could come and take whatever lamprey they wanted, and many non-tribal folks came and took them for sturgeon bait. And there were great numbers of lampreys, no one really cared, no one really knew or cared what happened to lamprey. And it's only been, and this is what really strikes me about this lamprey initiative, how far we have come. Because, back in the early 2000s, when people started to get worried, these lamprey numbers really started to be noticeably lower. And then in 2007, after discussion, we came up with this conservation initiative with the tribes and the service and the other federal agencies. And we did a lot of talking, we did a lot of planning, because frankly, no one had ever really looked at lamprey. No one had studied lamprey very much. They were almost a nuisance species up until then in some people's eyes. And particularly non-tribal probably. And so then we got to the Conservation Agreement in 2012, and since then, and it's been a great thing for our side, or the non-tribal side, the fact that we have now completed the regional implementation plans is a huge deal for everyone in this room. Because those are the plans that lay out for the first time in a systematic, strategic way projects and on-the-ground actions that will assist us with lamprey. And so, you're starting to see that turn around. I was sitting here thinking that probably back in the early 2000s, the amount of people in the federal agencies alone that really cared or worked on lamprey, 10 or 15 people maybe. And now, in 2017, I was just counting, you have over 7 federal agencies represented here. And collectively, there are hundreds of people in those agencies. They may not work full-time on lamprey, but lamprey's on their agenda. They are looking at lamprey issues, and they're cognizant of lamprey problems and habitat issues. That wasn't the case even 5 years ago. You heard my good friend Rock Peters here talk about the amount of work the Corps has done on lamprey passage. And that's all new in the last 5 to 10 years. And they've turned their best fish passage engineers onto the issue of lamprey passage. And so I did want to make the point, Don, that I think we've made great progress in the last 5 to 10 years on this lamprey issue. Great progress. And, the last couple of years we've seen more lamprey at some areas. Do we take credit for that? Well, we like to. Do we know really why we see a few more at Willamette Falls or Shears Falls or other? I don't know, because it's such a trans-Pacific species. But, I just know from the services perspective, just from 2013 alone, we have close to about 30 different scientists and biologists who work, maybe not full-time, but who work off and on and is on their agenda to work on lamprey habitat issues, science issues, planning, projects, lamprey passage, and we collectively have spent salaries and projects and tribal grants over $2.5 million since 2013, and that's just in the Fish and Wildlife Service. There's 6 other federal agencies and also the state agencies here. And so it's just interesting the amount of effort now that's really focused on lamprey and make me feel so good as we move forward. So looking forward from that, Don and others, I just want to thank everybody today for their tremendous efforts on lamprey. The service is certainly committed and recommitted to the work of its scientists and biologists to restoring lamprey numbers and recovery. I think we have to get a little more focused on outreach and education and some of those issues, whether it's for the youth of each of the tribal nations or even for the non-tribal youth. At the end of the day, when I talk to anyone about lamprey, I always remind them that, healthy watersheds, it supports salmon and steelhead and sturgeon and lamprey. That's what this is about, and why lamprey is so important for so many people, both culturally and natural resource-wise. So, Don and others around the table, so as we move and you look up at the screen, we're at this 5-year summit peak, we've ID'd discrete program actions, and now it's time to really focus down on those actions and look for new funding, more and new funding for those actions on the ground. Because I do sympathize, and I'm always feeling, as some of the speakers said, planning's okay, but I want to go do stuff. I want to see things happen and see how that works for lamprey and get stuff done on the ground. And I know all the tribal partners are really focused on passage and habitat issues, and it's great to see. And wherever we can support all of that, we will do that. But anyway, so I know there's a lot more speakers today, and they're going to focus down a little bit more on what it means to advance implementation. So Don, again, on behalf of the Fish and Wildlife Service and Robin Thorson, and appreciate very much the time on the agenda, and thank you very much, and thank, again, everybody here for being today. Thank you.
Thank you, Roy. And I think you make some very good points and observations about the progress that has been made. I recall when I was a biologist working with Oregon Fish and Wildlife, an old guy named Errol Clare and John Day, and he said, Don, you know what, we always thought these were trash fish, and we wrote down the populations, and we were like, oh, those are good fish. Because we didn't know that at the time. And so to where we came from, where we were actually systematically eliminating them to the point where we're coming together to restore them, it is a very historic time, and I think this agreement really represents that. You hear the tribal leaders that are here talking about the importance of it from a cultural perspective, from the livelihood, but it's also a very important part of, as you say, we're restoring watersheds, we're restoring salmon, we're restoring the eels, we're restoring all those species, and that's a very important element. I think the other part is really the staffing that is committed to doing this. And I was just told by Bob, we have here at CRITFC one of our lamprey specialists who helps to coordinate amongst the tribes. The tribes are doing their own work in the tributaries, restoring lamprey, and then there's a coordinated effort within the commission. So really thinking about how the regional policies being implemented going forward within the state agencies, with the tribal agencies, with the federal agencies that are here, with the nonprofit organizations, how we conduct that outreach is very important. how we educate people in the legislature here in Oregon and Washington, Alaska, and California, and Idaho about the importance of lamprey and how it benefits other populations. I think that's a really important part of the outreach and the education that has to occur. And even we're talking amongst the tribal leaders about having our kids not look at the video games, but being out there and actually catching lamprey again. I think those are very important lessons to continue that outreach, that education. But collectively, how do we do that? From the regional, we have great regional policy leaders here. How do we continue to move this forward? And how do we make sure that there is a discussion on a regular basis in each state agency, in each tribal agency, Fish and Wildlife Agency, in each federal agency, that what are we doing for lamprey? We're talking about OWED, for example. How do we incorporate some priority for lamprey restoration in the Watershed Enhancement Board funding criteria? Or maybe the same in Washington, or the same in Idaho. Obviously, that's something that's been discussed here with the BPA fish accords. But looking out of the Columbia Basin, how do we do that in California? How can the tribes and others support what California is doing? So these are some of the questions we want to continue to ask. Really, the idea moving forward is we're going to hear some presentations.
Mayor Don, and thank you for the chance to spend a few minutes on the agenda here to talk a little bit about this long-term structure and where we're headed. But again, just to remind folks, so my name is Roy Elliker from the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, and I'm here today speaking for Robin Thorson, the regional director, who unfortunately got called in to Washington, D.C. this week, and so I'm doing the best I can to replace her. I know she's a great speaker. So the other thing, Mr. Chair, is I wanted to spend just a couple of minutes and talk about my friend Roy Sampson.